HOA cops slammed my hood, didn't know I lead state patrol in this county. They boxed me in near the curve at Alder Lane, just past the 30 mph sign. I hadn't even made it to the main road before flashing red and blue lights snapped on in my rearview mirror. But something about those lights looked wrong, off sync, almost like a discount LED strip bought on impulse. The SUV that pulled me over wasn't police issued. It was a black Tahoe with magnetic door decals that read HOA Enforcement Unit 2. And standing in front of it was a woman in a knockoff tactical vest, holding a clipboard like it was a gun. "License and registration," she barked, voice nasal and high-strung. I rolled down my window. "You first. Who exactly are you with?" She tapped the badge on her vest. It read, Community Enforcement Division, laminated like a kid's science fair award. "I'm Karen Whitmore. This is a speed-controlled neighborhood, and you're 6 mph over." I stared at her, then at the decal again. She actually thought she could pull someone over. "I'm Lieutenant Nate Morgan," I said calmly, lifting my wallet and flipping open my real state-issued highway patrol badge. "And you're impersonating an officer." Her face paled like she'd seen a ghost, then quickly flushed red. "You're not above community regulations," she snapped. "HOA bylaws override certain municipal statutes." That was when I knew this wasn't just about a misunderstanding. This was a full-blown case of delusion fueled by fake power. I just moved into Crestfall Ridge, well, technically, just outside of it. A private acre, deeded independently, grandfathered out of the HOA's reach. I bought the property for the quiet. After 20 years of high-speed chases and issuing felony warrants on the freeway, I wanted peace. My wife, Ellie, teaches EMT response at the academy nearby. We're both used to chaos, but we don't invite it. We knew there were rumors about the HOA enforcers patrolling the area, but I never thought they'd try something this bold. Turns out, I underestimated just how power-drunk someone like Karen could become when given a vest, a scanner, and a clip-on badge. Karen wasn't backing down, not after I identified myself, not even after I calmly explained she had no legal right to pull anyone over, especially not on a road that didn't fall under HOA jurisdiction. Instead of retreating, she doubled down. "You were speeding," she insisted, clipboard trembling in her grip like it was the Constitution. "You passed the Allenberry crosswalk going 36 in a 30. That's an infraction under Section 14B of the HOA traffic ordinance." "I'm not part of your HOA," I said, my tone still level, but colder now. This road is county maintained, and even if it weren't, HOAs don't get to enforce traffic law. You are impersonating a law enforcement officer, and that is a felony. Karen stepped back a little, but just then, a second SUV rolled up behind hers. It was painted the same, black with white HOA enforcement unit decals, and out stepped a man with a chest puffed like a rooster and mirrored sunglasses that screamed, "Mall cop." "This him?" he asked. Karen nodded, refusing to comply. "Possible stolen vehicle." That was it. I took one step forward and said, loud and clear, "You just made a false claim over a state vehicle. That's strike 2. Keep going." The man, who I'd later find out called himself Commander Rick, laughed. "Sir, please step out of the vehicle. We're within our rights to detain you under the HOA's Charter for Safety Inspection and Vehicle Standards." I opened the door slow, deliberate, one hand on my badge, the other on my utility belt. I wasn't armed today. I wasn't on duty, but I was damn sure still an officer. "You touch this vehicle, and you'll be answering to the State Inspector General's office." But Karen didn't hear that, or maybe she didn't care. Because while I was talking to Rick, she walked around the back of my patrol cruiser and keyed the rear quarter panel. A long, deliberate scrape, plastic on paint. The sound sliced through my ears like a scream. "You just vandalized state property," I said flatly. "You'll be charged. I'm citing you for visual obstruction of neighborhood aesthetic values," she barked back. "Your vehicle's decals and antenna are offensive to the community." Rick stepped forward. "You're being disorderly." I laughed a single dry chuckle. "Rick, I'm going to ask you nicely one more time. step away from the vehicle. Behind me, my dash cam was recording every second. Backup was already on the way. Ellie had texted me she saw the HOA alerts going wild on next door suspicious man, refuses HOA commands. Officers en route. They weren't real officers, but they called themselves that. They started printing citations. No joke, Karen pulled a stub book from her clipboard and wrote out 3 fines totaling $1, $850, $400 for unregistered vehicle appearance, $300 for failure to obey HOA traffic officers, $150 for hostile conduct. Then she slapped them on my windshield. I pulled out my phone, opened the state legal app, and read it aloud. Section 843-855 of the Florida statutes, falsely impersonating a law enforcement officer is a felony of the 3rd degree. Karen smirked. We've heard your threats before. None of them ever stick. So that was the game. They'd done this to people before. Probably bullied retirees. People who didn't fight back. People who didn't have a badge. And now they'd picked the wrong one. Ellie arrived in our truck 15 minutes later, rolling up just as the county sheriff's deputy arrived behind her. "Hey, Nate," Deputy Cruz called, stepping out and adjusting his real badge. "I hear we've got another HOA cosplay incident." I nodded. "Yep, escalated. Got damage to the patrol vehicle, false citations, false ID, and 1 count of attempted unlawful detention." Karen's face turned the color of spoiled yogurt. "He's lying. He's just trying to intimidate us." "Ma'am," Cruz said, "you keyed a state cruiser, and you issued fake citations to a highway patrol lieutenant. That's not intimidation, that's evidence." Karen tried to pivot, shoving her badge toward him. "We're with the enforcement division. Your office signed our compliance charter." Cruz blinked, then laughed. "Lady, I am the office, and that charter was declared invalid in 2022. Rick folded his arms. "We're just trying to maintain order in the community. That's our mission. Your mission," I said, stepping forward, "is about to be reviewed by the Attorney General's office." Back at home that night, I walked around my cruiser with a flashlight. The keyed panel was deep through the paint, into the steel. That had cost over $3,000 in bodywork. But worse, they'd emboldened themselves to pull over anyone who looked out of place. I'd reviewed footage from my cruiser cam. They had scanners, radios, and something worse, an email trail. Ellie and I dug through their HOA board site. Hidden behind login walls were internal newsletters boasting about enforcement success and protecting the look and feel of Crestfall Ridge. They had names, license plates, descriptions of people who looked like renters. That's when I knew this wasn't about traffic at all. It was about profiling, intimidation, and control, and it was going to stop. By the next morning, I wasn't just angry, I was activated. There's a particular switch in people like me, those of us trained to dissect schemes and peel back facades. When something smells like power abuse and looks like intimidation, it usually is. And Karen's little HOA brigade wasn't just an overreaching committee, it was a full-blown surveillance operation masquerading as neighborhood protection. Ellie, ever the quiet strategist, had already pulled copies of their public crime prevention memos from the Crestfall Ridge HOA site. At a glance, they looked like your standard neighborhood watch notices missing cats, noise complaints, junk mail scams. But one folder stood out: code red protocols, confidential. She found it cached on Google's servers, meaning at some point, someone had mistakenly made it public. Inside were spreadsheets, hundreds of entries, license plates marked with red tags, excessive revving after 7 p.m., notes on who had what kind of flag on their porch, photos of visitors who stayed too long, racial descriptions beside vehicle types, a section called Known Threats, which included a photo of me taken from behind my cruiser. Next to it, dark sedan, unauthorized authority markings, watch status elevated, possibly ex-military. They were monitoring people who didn't fit their mold. Worse, they were documenting them and ranking them by threat level, a list almost entirely composed of renters, service workers, and people of color. I wasn't just a target because I was highway patrol. I was a target because I didn't play by their rules. Deputy Cruz and I paid a visit to one of the power boxes at the far edge of Alder Lane, a place where homeowners had complained about motion sensors going off every night. What we found chilled me. A Wi-Fi-enabled camera disguised as a decorative rock, wired into a solar power cell, a private surveillance network that wasn't registered with the city. Some HOA units can legally install cameras near mailboxes or common paths, but this setup was watching the road, a county road. Karen and Rick are playing militia with Ring cameras, Cruz muttered. We traced 3 more identical setups, each hidden in street lamps and fence posts. When we followed the signals, they led to one router, mounted on top of the HOA clubhouse. And on that router, we found a port forwarding system named Neighborhood Command. It was feeding video to outside the state, to a private security firm registered in Arizona, Sentinel Domestic Intelligence Group. That's right, they were selling community surveillance data. That night, I gathered stories. I met a teen named Jasmine whose boyfriend had been followed by the HOA enforcement after dropping her off. They'd photographed his plates, posted them online with warnings like potential drug activity vehicle, seen idling outside Unit 114 for 8 minutes. The poor kid worked at a smoothie shop and was afraid to come back to the neighborhood. Then there was Mr. Patel, who'd lived there since 2006. His mailbox had been tagged with red spray paint. He didn't know why until I showed him the code red spreadsheet. Under his address it read unkempt landscaping, frequent foreign visitors, possible subletting. That was his cousin from India. Karen's fake HOA was running a social credit system, and they were drunk with control. We needed more than surveillance proof. We needed a confession, and so I baited them. I scheduled a public HOA resident meeting, posing as a concerned neighbor under my middle name and Ellie's maiden name. We arrived early. The room smelled of burned coffee and plastic chairs. Rick stood at the front like a politician who'd watched too many procedural shows. Karen hovered at his side in her tight black vest, the kind you'd see on security guards in outlet malls. I stood and asked, "Is it true that residents are being profiled for visiting patterns and vehicle type?" Karen stiffened. "We monitor behavior for safety. Is it also true that you've installed off-book surveillance without community vote?" "Surveillance is part of our proactive deterrence," Rick interrupted, his face twitching. "If you're not doing anything wrong, you shouldn't be worried." I held up a printed copy of their rotor logs. "I'd like to ask the residents in this room," I said, voice loud and calm, "if they gave permission for their vehicle footage to be streamed to Sentinel Domestic Intelligence in Arizona." Dead silence. A murmur began. Someone gasped. A woman from the back asked, "Wait, what? You're sending video outside the state?" Rick turned red. "This meeting is adjourned." Karen yanked the mic cord from the table and shouted, "We know who you are. We know what you're trying to do." And that was their biggest mistake, because Ellie had streamed the entire meeting, live, to Facebook, YouTube, local news. It wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was evidence. In real time, people in the neighborhood watched Karen melt down in front of a dozen residents. They watched Rick lie. They heard the database terms. They saw the spreadsheets. By midnight, it had over 80,000 views. By dawn, the county council had launched an emergency review of Crestfall Ridge HOA's enforcement protocols. And by noon, I was invited to testify. By sunrise, my face was on every news channel in the Tri-County area. State trooper exposes rogue HOA police in Crestfall Ridge. Fake cops. Real surveillance. How one highway patrol lieutenant brought them down. They showed clips from the live stream the moment Karen shouted that she knew who I was. The spreadsheets in my hands. The stunned silence of residents learning their every move had been recorded. But beneath the viral headlines, things were heating up. I'd expected shame, or at least a hasty retreat. But Karen, she came back like a wildfire with gasoline. The very next morning, HOA Unit 2 rolled through my street. Karen herself drove it, vest on, siren blaring, and a megaphone sticking out the window like she was leading a parade. She shouted up and down the block, "Warning, unregistered officer on the premises." Protect our neighborhood community lockdown, advised neighbors stepped outside in disbelief. Ellie stood beside me on our porch, arms folded. She's spiraling. She's trying to trigger confrontation, make herself the victim. I said, classic escalation tactic. It's desperation now. And I was right. Karen parked her SUV across my driveway. She stepped out and waved papers like Holy Writ. Lieutenant Nathan Morgan, this is a citizen's citation. You have breached HOA operational zones and distributed stolen documents. I didn't say a word. I walked down the steps with slow, deliberate calm and handed her my own document, a court-ordered cease and desist. This is from the county attorney's office. You are hereby ordered to suspend all HOA enforcement activity pending full investigation. Karen's hand trembled as she read the heading. No, this is intimidation, she muttered. You can't silence a safety officer. You're not a safety officer, I said quietly. You're a civilian impersonating one, and you're under active review for multiple charges, including harassment, property damage, and data violations. She didn't hear me. She was too busy dialing her phone. 2 hours later, Karen called a special HOA emergency session, but no one came. Residents were backing out. Comments on the Facebook group were now filled with anger. Why were you filming my kids? You told us it was a city rule. We were never part of your code red system. How much money did you spend on those fake SUVs and radios? Karen, in a last-ditch move, sent 2 enforcers to my house again. They wore full black tactical outfits, fake badges, and had cameras strapped to their chests like they were filming an episode of Cops. They didn't even knock. They barged into my backyard. That was the final straw, because what they didn't know was that my cruiser's dash cam was pointed at the side gate, recording the whole thing. And more importantly, I'd already alerted State Troop G. At 3:14 p.m., I saw the familiar fleet roll in. 5 cruisers from Troop G, black and blue with gold decals. No sirens, just presence. Authority. One by one, they boxed in the fake HOA SUVs. The moment Karen stepped outside to yell at the troopers, she was met with a firm command. Karen Whitmore, step away from the vehicle. You are under investigation for impersonating a law enforcement officer and violating the terms of a court order. She froze. No, this is a mistake. These are private volunteers. One trooper stepped forward. Sergeant Gray, badge gleaming. Ma'am, you keyed a state patrol vehicle. You issued citations to a state officer. You installed illegal surveillance without permits. And now your HOA database has been linked to a private security firm under federal investigation. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Only the distant sound of her world cracking. Her HOA cop buddy, Rick, tried to run, didn't get far. 2 plainclothes agents from the Attorney General's office intercepted him down the street. He'd been on their radar for 2 years, ever since he'd tried starting a private vigilante patrol in another county. Here's the moment that changed everything. Karen, on her knees in her driveway, zip-tied in front of her fake squad car, my real badge clipped to my belt. Dozens of neighbors filming, not because they were rubbernecking, but because they were furious. Not just at Karen, but at themselves for ever believing this was normal. The Crestfall Ridge HOA was suspended by county order within 24 hours. All citations ever issued were declared void. Homeowners were refunded for fines they'd paid. Karen's house foreclosed on after a civil suit was filed by the HOA's own insurance firm for fraudulent representation and unauthorized liability exposure. Rick facing federal charges for data trafficking and surveillance violations. The SUVs auctioned off by the sheriff's department to pay restitution, and the code red database deleted from every cloud account it ever touched, but not before being submitted as evidence in a federal investigation. It's been 4 months since Karen Whitmore kneeled zip-tied in her driveway, her HOA-branded SUV behind her like a tombstone for the illusion of authority. But even now, the damage echoes, because justice doesn't end with a headline, a courtroom, or a takedown. Justice begins again every time a system gets rebuilt with truth, and this time, with eyes wide open. The Crestfall Ridge HOA was officially dissolved 2 weeks after the state hearing. Turns out, the entire Community Enforcement Division wasn't just illegal, it wasn't real. The organization had no state charter, no licensing, and no lawful capacity to issue citations or maintain surveillance infrastructure. They had created their own little regime, and like most regimes built on fear and fake power, it imploded under the weight of truth. I was called back to testify before the County Oversight Committee, not in uniform, not as a highway patrol lieutenant, just as Nate Morgan, husband, neighbor, and someone who'd seen too much to stay silent. I laid out the facts. Over $140,000 of HOA dues were funneled into unapproved surveillance equipment. More than 38 residents were wrongfully cited or publicly profiled, and one retired Navy veteran was even physically detained by Rick during a routine inspection. That vet's name was Harold Gibson. He hadn't come forward out of shame until he saw what happened to me. Justice isn't flashy. It doesn't ride in with sirens. Real justice looks like this: community town halls filled with people asking real questions, a bipartisan task force on HOA abuse sponsored by the state Senate, a new hotline where residents can report harassment from unregulated HOA boards. And for me, it looked like staying, not walking away, not selling the house and retreating to somewhere quieter. I owed Crestfall Ridge and myself a commitment to rebuild, not abandon. A few weeks after the final court ruling, I got a letter. It was from Jasmine, the teenage girl whose boyfriend had been profiled. Mr. Morgan, my mom says you saved our neighborhood, but I think what you really did was teach us not to be afraid to call things out. You made us feel like we matter. Thank you. Jasmine. I read it twice. I cried the third time, because this wasn't about a cruiser being keyed or citations and or cameras. It was about dignity, about showing people they weren't crazy for feeling trapped, watched, and silenced, and about proving that when someone with real authority chooses to stand with the people, not above them, change happens. You'd think she'd disappear, but no. Karen filed an appeal, claimed she was unjustly targeted for trying to keep the community safe. Her appeal was denied unanimously, and now she's facing both criminal and civil charges: impersonation of an officer, property damage, false imprisonment, and data abuse. But what's worse, no one came to her defense. Not one neighbor, not even Rick, who took a plea deal in exchange for testifying that Karen was the ringleader. The same woman who once bragged about controlling the neighborhood, one citation at a time, was now banned from holding any position on any HOA in the state of Florida. Crestfall Ridge feels different now. The guard booths are gone. The fake patrol SUVs were auctioned off. One of them now belongs to a donut truck company, painted pink and parked at the farmer's market. Kind of poetic, actually. Neighbors walk their dogs without fear of being questioned. Kids bike without being filmed. And people talk again, not whisper, talk. Ellie and I still host backyard BBQs, and nobody complains about the smell. Not anymore. They bring plates. They bring lawn chairs. They bring stories. That's how you know you've reclaimed something. You don't need a badge to be dangerous, and you don't need a uniform to protect people. But if you wear either, you'd better know the weight they carry. Because I've seen both sides. I've worn the uniform that earns trust and seen people fake it to control and destroy. And I'll say this: there's a difference between keeping order and demanding obedience. Karen never understood that. But now everyone else does. Have you ever faced abuse of power in your community? Do you believe HOAs should be monitored more closely? Where's the line between safety and control? Share your thoughts. Speak your truth. Because justice isn't passive, it's collective. What's the boldest stand you've ever taken for your neighborhood? Drop it in the comments.